it would require a large body of troops to monitor that part of the frontier. Now, have we got those troops?
As we were saying to our political editor, Kate McCann, discussions are going on about British and French troops ending up as peacekeepers in Ukraine. Is this a good role for British forces? Let's speak to Lord Dannatt, former head of the British Army, who served during peacekeeping missions in Kosovo in 1999. Good morning to you.
Asma, good morning.
Is this an uncontroversial idea?
It's certainly not uncontroversial. I would say it was extremely controversial. Yes, if at some point in the future negotiations between Russia and Ukraine come to a point where there's a ceasefire and the fighting stops, there'll have to be some kind of interpositional force to monitor whatever demilitarized zone or ceasefire line is agreed. I think that's something we've seen in Bosnia, we've seen it in Kosovo, and we've seen it elsewhere. The big question is who will provide those intermediary forces. Your suggestion is that British and French troops might be part of that, and I suppose that is theoretically possible. But the big question is would Vladimir Putin accept troops like that? Would they accept NATO troops? And indeed, is that desirable? And from a NATO's perspective, would we not be playing somewhat into Putin's agenda that this is not Ukraine's fight, but this is the West's fight, it's NATO's fight against Russia? So if we were to stick French and British troops in that intermediary position between Ukrainian troops and Russia, we could well be playing into Putin's agenda. So is it controversial? Yes, it is. Is it likely to happen? Actually, I don't think it will.
Right. Well, what is the alternative then? Because, when a peace deal does come, there will, this always happens, doesn't it? There's always people, whoever they are, troops, neutral troops perhaps, patrolling the kind of the border, the buffer zone, etc. So what could the alternative be?
Well, you ask a good question as far as that's concerned. I think at this stage, I would say it was still premature. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, was talking only yesterday and saying that the West must go on and NATO must go on supporting Ukraine to put Ukraine in a position of strength when it comes to negotiations. There is, however, an alternative narrative that actually says that Ukraine is really struggling and that this war could be a negative, or this year could be a decisive year in a negative way for Ukraine. So there's a lot to play for at the present moment. Yes, we're all excited about a ceasefire in Gaza and looking to see how that works out. And Trump may well have had some effect as far as that is concerned. But we have to wait to see what the Trump effect is going to be on the Ukraine war. I have to see whether negotiations do start, whether Ukraine will be in a position of strength, and just how that will all play out. Yes, there is the second or third order issue. If there is going to be a ceasefire, who will monitor that? I said that theoretically it's possible that British and French and other NATO countries might provide those troops, but I think Putin would probably rule it out. And here's a thought. If it was to be agreed that Britain would take control of, let's say, 10, 15% of that 700-kilometer frontier, it would require a large body of troops to monitor that part of the frontier. Now, have we got those troops? And this is an issue I think that the British government's got to weigh up in the context of our strategic defence review. The army is pretty busy in doing all the things it's currently doing. Could it afford, say, 5,000 to 10,000 troops rotating on 6-month tours to maintain the frontier in Ukraine? I'm not sure that it could at the current strength. So this is a factor. Does the Ministry of Defence cut the army even more, or does it make other savings in defence if there's not going to be a real increase in the defence budget? We talk about going to 2.5%. Many of us think it should be 3 or 3.5%. Trump thinks 5%. So the Trump factor is an interesting one.
Yes.
Let's wait to see what Donald does.
Let's wait and see what Donald does. Okay, Lord Dannatt, thank you very much, former head of the British Army.
Keir Starmer is in Ukraine today. It's his first visit to the country. There was some chuntering that it's taken this long for him to get there. Let's talk to Times Radio's political editor, Kate McCann. Political editor for now, Kate McCann. Good morning, Kate.
Sounds like a threat. Morning.
I'm not threatening you. Now, it is maybe a surprise to people for a man who seems to have spent a lot of the last 6 months not in this country, but in a variety of other countries. It's taken him this long to get to Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think that there definitely had been some disquiet from Ukrainians and President Zelensky too, who felt that they would have liked to have seen the Prime Minister head over there sooner than he has. I mean, I think what Downing Street would say is it's a different stage of the war. Rishi Sunak went within the first month, I think, but it was in a very different place. And I think actually the signal that we're getting now ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration is that European leaders are coming together to try and work out what happens next. And potentially that's where a lot of the thoughts and a lot of the kind of work has gone in over the last couple of months as we've had a new government here, has been much more focused on kind of speaking to European allies about how they can protect Ukraine, essentially.
Do they know something? One of the questions we were wondering this morning, because Trump's obviously said what he said about Ukraine. We can all see the effects all around the world of inauguration happening on Monday. You know, you can really feel the Trump effect on geopolitics. Do they know something specific, do you think, or are they saying, we know there's going to be some changes because of Donald Trump, we better try and work out what the post-Trump world looks like?
No, I think there is definitely, I mean, there has been work going into a deal, and we know that because Zelensky has accepted that that is essentially what's going to happen next. And that was probably largely brought on, or at least sped up, by Donald Trump saying that that was what he was going to achieve immediately on taking office. He's now slightly put that timetable back. But I think if you think about what we've been talking about on Ukraine over the last couple of months, it's been a lot more focused on, well, how do we guarantee security in that region in the years ahead? And that's why you've seen, I mean, the Prime Minister met with President Macron in Downing Street at the start of this week. On Tuesday, the German Defence Secretary went to Ukraine to meet with President Zelensky, and all of those European nations coming together to talk about how they essentially guarantee the security of Ukraine. So yes, they are now planning for the next stage of this war very actively.
What's interesting about that is that could involve British troops being used as peacekeepers, which raises the prospect of guaranteeing that there will be no further Russian incursions with British troops on the ground. And then, of course, if the problem follows after that, all sorts of difficulties then ensue. But is that on the table, do you think?
I think it's very difficult to say at the moment. It's a plan that's being led by President Macron, so by the French, and it's something that Macron and Zelensky have talked about together at length. And really what this is a security guarantee, a way to ensure that Russia doesn't break the terms of any potential deal. The problem with that is exactly what you say, which is if you do put troops on that border, and if Russia does ignore the terms of any deal, then it could draw troops into potentially active fighting. And how do you navigate that? I mean, what do you do then in that situation? So the UK hasn't agreed to it. We have definitely discussed it with Macron, and the Germans have discussed it too. A number of European countries have, but there's no formal agreement on that yet. And I think it would be a big step actually for us to make.
Because the other version of that approach is to get Ukraine quickly into NATO, where the same thing would happen, that if then Russia did break the terms of the deal, they'd be invading a NATO country, which would have the concomitant problems that everyone can work out. And again, that feels like a huge step that may not be taken.
Yeah, and I think all of this we're talking about in the context of Donald Trump, who is, I mean, that's part of the momentum is driving, you know, the fact that Trump is going to come into office. He has a very different opinion on Ukraine. He's essentially said that Europe should pick up the slack, not just financially, but in terms of, you know, militarily too. That is a huge, big gulf that they will have to fill. So Europe is trying to get its act together. But I do think that, you know, things are going to change when Donald Trump comes into office. He's going to request far higher defence spends. He's very sceptical about some of these organisations like NATO and their role in this and other conflicts. So yeah, I think these leaders are trying to prepare for what comes next. But the unpredictability of Donald Trump is potentially what's helped with the Gaza conflict, but may well complicate any deal with Ukraine and Russia.
It's really interesting to see what happens actually. And Trump's inauguration is on Monday, and we'll bring you all the coverage of that here on Times Radio. Now, Kate, before you go, a little bit of news. We did it in the news bulletin with a very terrible drum roll.
I liked the drum roll.
Oh, did you?
Did you not want the Keir Starmer 5-5?
Well, if you've got it.
I'm putting pressure on Tom Noonan we should do it. We're gonna do it in the news bulletin, though, aren't we?
Oh, are we?
I think we should do.
Okay,
yes.
Fabulous. Kate is going to take over on breakfast. She's going to be here with Stig. Now, Kate, we'll have a private version of this where I'll tell you all the things to watch out for with Stig.
Good.
But we can have a public one now, and we can invite Times Radio listeners to give you some tips on how to deal with Stig Abel. So you know. 0333 033
I remember agreeing to this.
Yeah, you don't need to. Tips for Kate. How is she going to deal with working with Stig Abel?
Are you excited, leaving that one aside, to doing the job?
Yeah, I'm delighted. I can't quite believe it's happening. I'm really, really excited. Big shoes to fill there,
Oh,
Asma.
well, almost size 8. Almost size 8.
You're
so
kidding?
very big. Yeah, I've got massive feet.
Yeah,
big clunking
That's
feet.
between 7 and 8 clown's feet.
That's bigger than I expected.
How are you? This whole conversation is turning very weird. How are you feeling about the 3 a.m. alarm call? And have you worked out that it is 3 a.m.?
Yes,
It is 3
I've worked
a.m..
out it's 3 a.m.
Because it's different, depends where you live, etc.
No, you're right. But I think in order not to miss the start of the programme, 3 a.m. is probably a wise wake up time. That's the bit I'm dreading the most because
Okay.
I'm a late night girl. I'm not an early morning
I
girl.
was too. I was too.
Were you?
I am a late night girl, and it was quite a shock to the system. But it will be fine. The adrenaline keeps you going.
Yeah, and also
The 10
look,
o'clock you fall over, basically, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, how lucky are we to be able to wake up with everybody? And,
That's true.
And hopefully people will will like what they hear.
People, will 6 a.m. still be the sexy hour?
Oh yeah, I don't know. What's your manifesto, Kate?
I haven't agreed to a sexy hour.
No, that wasn't in the contract, was it?
No.
Quite right.
I don't think that should ever be put down on paper.
Maybe well, it was never put on paper. It was verbal. But I think you should rewrite the constitution of Times Radio Breakfast. And you're starting on Monday, February the 3rd.
Yes.
And just to say, Kate, loads of people have written in touch since we announced it so poorly in the news bulletin earlier. But everyone's very sad to see Asma go, but they are uniformly pleased that you're joining, Kate. Of all the people we could have picked, I think everyone recognises you are the best possible choice for this job. So we can't wait to have you on the programme.